Hello and welcome to Synergy Speaks. Today, Thomas and I are going to discuss education in a very broad sense, maybe in a narrower sense, music education, or really the intangibles that come with being an educator. Someone who is tasked with the responsibility of transmitting an opinion or a view of the world or of a discipline that should be valuable to a student. I've always maintained that the best educators are the best students. You don't really want to study with someone who is a better player than you necessarily. There's plenty of those people. Just go on the internet, you'll find them. You really want to study with someone who's a better student than you, someone who can really show you how to study. At least that's how I grew up, and the values that I sort of watched flourish and turn into something really really cool, in the sense that I get to have a very profound influence over a lot of young people, and they have a lot of influence over me in ways that I don't even really like intentionally acquiesce to. There's like an energy about a school or a program or anything where you get a group of young minds who are there mostly because they want to. But even if they're there because they don't want to, that can actually sometimes be even better. That was my case in public school. But anyway, Thomas, you had a big day today.
I did. But I want to say something on what you just said, because I think I totally agree about the teacher being the student, right? Or being a good student. Because what I often find with when I've done, especially like private lessons, it's like I'm demonstrating to the student how to learn music, right? Or how to learn a song. So I'm like walking them through the steps that I would do with this piece of music, or like a challenge has come up, this thing isn't going so well, like this is how I would tackle that. So I feel like I'm constantly showing my own student, or demonstrating my own student to the student, and then I feel like just that'll kind of like rub off in time, or that'll they'll pick up on um, the instinct of that. So yeah, I really like what you said about that. But yeah, I had a big day. First day at a new school. It's it's kind of like a freedom alternative school. But as we were discussing before we pressed record, it was, it's kind of like a regular school in a lot of ways too. It's got a lot of those same um, that same environment going on of teacher and classroom and just these dynamics. And it was just really interesting picking up on some of those dynamics. Like you've got the problem kids, and then you've got the stories that the teachers tell about the problem kids. And something I noticed is that I would believe those stories initially, and then I'd kind of step back and say, well, that's not the whole picture. Like there's more going on here than just this student is so terrible and is like on the edge of destroying the school and needs to be like, there's just more to the story. So I was just like considering the sort of psychic environment of a school, and how rich that is, but also how limiting that can be, right? If you buy into these stories. So that was probably like one of the main insights of the day was, even though these narrow stories are told, if you really step back, there's like, it's really just energy playing. And I was also really struck by how much I was energized by the day, even though like I taught 3 classes, and 2 of them I would say went pretty horribly in terms of like kids were crazy. Like they were big classes. They were kind of like 2 classes grouped in to one each time. So these kids weren't really used to each other. And then there were problem kids like acting out. So, but it's still, at the end of the day, I was like, I was just kind of fueled up by the whole thing, and I was like looking at where the problems were, and like I'm just like planning for how to deal with these things. So it's it's really kind of an interesting almost exercise in sovereignty to enter into a place like this and see what happens, right? Because I think you can get defeated by some of these stories and some of these like really like, problem sort of dynamics going on. But, and I also, this is the first day, so I don't know, maybe I'll like, I definitely considered that maybe I don't want to work here because maybe some of these kids are going to keep, really kind of destroying the vibe and
Mm.
because it really does affect everyone in the class. Like there was a moment where one of these kids stepped away for a while, and then like everyone just kind of, I don't know, felt more safe, or they just like clicked in for a moment, and suddenly like the whole vibe changed. So it's going to be an interesting adventure.
Dude, one of the things that I tell my older students, my high level students that are like, going out on tour and stuff like that,
Yeah.
is I use this analogy called bong water and beef stew. And I'm
Okay.
like, just imagine it's Sunday, like football's on, whatever. You're walking downstairs, your mom's got the kitchen going, everything's flying, like she's got all this stuff out of the fridge. Like, what's going on? You smell this aroma in the air. It's beef stew. It's amazing. And it's going to be ready just at halftime, and you have it. And it's like, but now just imagine you see your mom pour that tiniest bit of bong water into that beef stew. It's ruined. It doesn't matter that the beef stew is this immaculate, beautiful thing. That much bong water fucked it up, and you can't. It's just in the opposite. It works the opposite way. You can pour as much beef stew into bong water as you want, and I'm not going to eat any. Point
Yeah.
is, negativity is very potent. It's much more potent than positivity. It does take like one, and in your case, like one kid who's going to really just make it difficult to I guess steer the psychic traffic of that class. Like that's sort of I think what happens. It's like when a kid doesn't want to be there, they learn how to get out of it. And a lot of the times they're just like, if I can just sort of derail the entire like focus of this subject from day one, I won't personally have to deal with it, and I personally don't want to deal with it, which is something. I mean, I work exclusively at a music school, so I guess I don't have to deal with that quite as much or really at all. So that's got to be pretty tough. I personally would just, I don't know how the structure is at your school, but I would just be like, all right, you're out of here. Day one, that kid's out. Just kick him out, send him to the principal's office or whatever, and just set the tone. That's just my style, though.
Yeah, no, it's like that's an interesting um like tactic to discuss, right? Because I think there's a lot of uh truth in doing that, because you set the stage for what's allowed in the environment, right? Like what we're cool with here, right? And you know what? That's not cool. That's out of here. But then you get like one of the teachers told me today kind of her take on that. It's like you're telling the kid they're bad and getting them out of the class and kind of perpetuating this story that maybe is going on with this kid. I think it really depends on the context, whether it's a good call or not. But yeah,
Oh, yeah.
my instinct is definitely to like not allow that stuff really to fly at all, but man, it was a jungle today, I gotta say, for much of it. So, but I'm up to the challenge. We'll see how it all goes, and now I can really like plan the day um to make things flow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to kind of like bring to the kids what they want to do and what they're going to flow with, right? And also I think just talking to these kids can go a long way too, right? Like whereas kind of continually like trying to like discipline them in the whole flow of things, that doesn't really tend to work. Whereas I think giving them a little bit of time where you like really have kind of a heart to heart with them. And it's interesting, like as soon as I showed up today, I was supposed to have a meeting before I started teaching, but I was kind of brought into a situation. It's like, can you help? I got this problem, kid. So right off, I was like, like basically dealing with problem kids. And actually, that was a really interesting experience because I could give my full attention to this one kid. And I think it went quite well. Kind of just the overall talking to him for a bit and just being very kind of like gentle in terms of dealing with him, but also like very focused in a way. Like I wasn't just like hammering over the head with, you got to do this now. It was more like, okay, this is the next step according to your teacher. What needs to happen now, and then just kind of like waiting for him to come along with that. And then he didn't. So then I kind of go back and talk again. Like, so I just, yeah, I think it's important. At least my kind of plan is to deal with these situations. If it needs to go really deep, then go really deep with the kid, right? And yeah, we'll see how it all unfolds.
Yeah. One of the reasons I've never really wanted to work in like a school where a multi-purpose school is because there is that like thing where the kids have to go there, like
Yeah.
it's like mandated by the state or the where your country or wherever. It's like there's this like sort of existential thing where this kid might be like acting out, and I'm not quite sure like where the boundaries are of like what I could really offer that kid, because in my life, like in my situation, when kids come to me and they complain about school, I can very honestly tell them my opinion. I can just say, yeah, I don't know. I don't think homework's that important. I think not getting in trouble is important. I think like keeping a low profile is good. Like I can just sort of offer the stuff that I went through in terms of like when I was in high school, I hated every second of it. I did not want to be there. I loved my music classes. I liked a handful of history and English classes. Everything else sucked, or at least just in my opinion. I couldn't stand it. So I did just enough to keep people off my back. So like I could give someone that advice. I'm like, dude, I know you don't give a shit about whatever like slope or or your chemistry homework, and I know that you just want to practice guitar and your parents are threatening to take away your guitar lessons. So like, dude, just fucking deal with slope. Like just deal with slope because you love guitar. Like that's how I can handle it. But if I'm like in school, how do I be like, yeah, fuck your history class? Like, I can't do that. I can't, because even though I don't know, maybe that's not even the right thing to say, like in the first place, but, or to like sort of give my somewhat sardonic opinion about institutions. But I don't know, that is sort of how I operate. I'm just pretty much myself. So like, yeah, I don't know how I would be able to deal with giving like life advice to a kid who is like their primary thing is being like, this institution is stupid and I shouldn't have to participate in it. And
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I agree. Like, I agree, man. I don't know though, but you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot a little bit. Like maybe like, I don't know, is it a structured school where you have a schedule? Because I have a student, a Bay student, who goes to an alternative high school, but it's just like she didn't get in trouble or anything. It's just like a free for all. Like they have classes, and you just go to whichever ones you want every day, and there's no grades or tests or anything like that. You just do whatever you want. She does like pottery and like stuff like that.
Huh, that sounds cool. No, it's more structured. It's more like each kid has their schedule. Usually it's the same as the rest of their grade. It's not a huge school, so the grades are kind of like lumped together. You get like 2, 3, or 4, 5, 6.
Hmm.
Uh, So yeah, there's definitely more of a pattern they have to follow. But yeah, it's a good point. I was thinking about this in relation to the one kid as I was talking to him. Just like, yeah, he's almost trapped at the school, like and I mean, what I saw with him is that he just didn't see any light to the situation at all. It was all just very, very dark. But, it's actually a very beautiful school. Like, um, in terms of like, there's a lot of nature around, um, and the rooms are quite nice too.
Hmm.
So I just invited him to kind of like find some good spots, that he sees in his situation there, right? So, because I mean, at the end of the day, we're like, I think of this book that I once read called The Myth of Freedom, um, which is kind of making this point, like we're always kind of in some situation or another, right? So this idea of being kind of completely free is more, I think, about your state of being as, the situations approach you or you find yourself in this or that situation, right? Like you're gonna meet vitriol,
Right.
all over the place, right? And yeah, and it's kind of like, for me today it was really interesting, and this gets into the other point that we started to talk about before recording too, which is like, um and you even brought up, I think you brought up like being on a hamster wheel. So the context is we were talking about kind of having a structure in your day, right? And like, if you don't, if you have a lot of free time, it almost can, for some people, be almost like a problem, right? And so what I noticed today is like, yeah, being at the school and just taking part in these things, it was almost like being on a hamster wheel, sure, but it like kind of like launched me as well, in terms of like, it's just a lot of energy there. Um and then yeah, when I was done, I kind of went home and I was kind of like pumped to kind of like work on some different things in relation to the school, but also otherwise too. So um now I kind of forget how I got into this point, but maybe you could take over from there.
Yeah, it's all right. I mean, well, we were talking about that just like, or at least I brought that up in the sense that I want to be on a hamster wheel like all the time.
Yeah.
Like my days off are, um, I mean, sometimes they're great. Like when I get into a thing, like when I got way into hiking and photography, I like
Yeah.
couldn't wait for every weekend because I was just like, I'm gonna do this, and I was super dilated by it at all times. Um, but when I'm not on like a current thing, like I go through these lulls sometimes where
Hmm.
yeah, I have a hard time really pouring myself into like one thing, which is something I talked about on the last episode too. That's like a daytime problem for me. So
Yeah.
like when I'm working in the daytime, when I'm teaching, it's like people get to just present me with their issues. Like, hey man, this F chord is fucked up. And I'm like, yeah, that's because you can't bend your index finger. I mean, you can flatten your index finger and bend your ring finger in middle at the same time. Here's how to
That's
work on
right.
that. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
And that's
it's like, oh, yes, that was satisfying because like you presented me with an organic problem and that I have just the perfect solution for. And that's just like all day. And I'm like, this is cool. Yes, you're holding your stick weird. Yes. Like, and then I get to the end of that day and it's like, I'm going to practice now because I've just been thinking about music for the last however long. And I get into these things and all the, like, although sometimes I can carry that over into the weekends and say, oh, I'm just going to like practice all weekend. Sometimes like you kind of can't do that all the time. You have to recharge on other stuff. So but I definitely find that being in and around other people's issues and problems around music specifically, that I can help them with, it energizes me. It helps, it sends me into this sort of like, um, almost like an objective observer who can say, I see how this I see how this action is suboptimal, and then I see the optimal way to do this based on the context that you're trying to do this thing in. And I also see the lineage between those two things. And I can, in some fun, poetic way, express that to this person. And like that just like gets me pumped, because I can just then do that same thing to myself. I can just flip the mirror around and go into practice mode and just say, dude, yeah, the of four is the thing that's fucked up. I know it sounds like the and of one is the note that's late, and it is late, but it's because of the like I would never have heard that if I didn't spend all day. By the way, if you're not a musician, you have no idea what that means. That's okay. It just means that I'm at that like weird level of like how specific my issue is, because I've been able to really exercise that all day, and that just brings me joy. And when I can't do that, I'm like, fuck. I need to like walk for like 4 hours and take pictures of everything pretty that I see just to exhaust myself.
Hmm. Yeah, it's such an interesting way to look at things, right? And it reminds me of a Rumi poem that I really like, and his poems weren't really titled, but often you could get a title out of there. The translator would pull one out. So the translator called this one "Increase Your Need," and the poem had this image of like sort of like a web, and it's almost like inviting you to like increase your web, increase your web, increase your need, because it's like then it's almost like reality, or maybe you will actually rise to the occasion in all these kinds of ways, and God will smile upon you, kind of stuff, in kind of Rumi's way. And so I always thought that was an interesting poem, because I don't know, I think there's something when you get into say spirituality, or I don't know, living well, or whatever, however you want to put it, you almost you need to kind of cut things out of your life, right? That's part of the path too. And so this idea of increase your need, like increase, just like open yourself up, it's kind of like, it's a little bit scary, but I think in the context of what we're saying, like I really see it, and just having this experience today too, of just being kind of in the midst of all of these problems, I guess I could say, or I guess we could look at each of the kids in each of these classes as being kind of on their own kind of hamster wheel, trying to get to where they're going, and just kind of being involved in that sea of activity, and kind of doing your best amidst it all, right? But I also really like your point about like the music specifically, for you and I being musicians and music teachers. There is something about like, just working in that space that's like so, yeah, there's like a joy to it for me as well, which, all I can, I think, really say about that is that we both are kind of in the work that we really like to do right now, and yeah, and I'm kind of inspired to just get back in there, and in a way, because I know that realm so well, like being in this class of, it was a big class. It was like grade 6 to high school ages, and it was a full room. I'm not sure how many kids were in it, maybe 30, maybe more. But even just like talking to them for this one class, like getting a sense of what they like about music, it just like gets me going as a composer and an arranger. And it's actually very easy for me to, even for kids who don't know how to play, we got like a bunch of these little tambourines, we got a bunch of harmonicas in C, and they're just there's weird harmonicas too, like they're not typical. They say they're 10-hole harmonicas, but only every other one actually has the sound, and it goes up a diatonic scale in and out like the whole way, whereas I'm used to ones that's like when you blow out, it's the one chord, the 1 3 5. And again, we're
Yeah.
getting music theory stuff that some people won't be able to follow. But anyway, what's my point is like I can like work with all those elements, I can like put together some cool arrangements for like, say, breaking that class up into like 3 or 4 groups doing different instruments or different rhythms or different singing parts. And there's just kind of like a um and another thing I'm just thinking about that came up today. One of the kids, we were talking about discipline, and he said the mastery of the it's mastery of the mundane. And I was just like, whoa, that's freaking awesome, man. um
Damn.
so you and I have spent a lot of time mastering music, um and so we can kind of bring that to people in a way that kind of sparkles, like you were saying, like you can kind of come up with this poetic way of communicating this idea about the of four, and the and of one, and and help that player to sparkle in their own music, right?
Yeah. I mean, for when I was in high school, my jazz ensemble, uh, or he was just a band director in general. He was concert band and jazz, and just and the music theory teacher. He was like the music teacher of like
Yeah.
I went to a pretty small high school. There was a theater director who was also taught music classes, but this guy, Mr. Grammer, he was the dude, and um, I love this man. I owe him so much, but he was such a pushover, and I like he showed me like so many things that I had no context for at all, and I maybe never would have found out about. Like Steely Dan, he played Kid Charlemagne, and I was like, whoa, hold on, hold this. What is this?
Yeah.
What is whoa? I was just like literally like. And everyone else was just kind of sitting there, just like, because it was for like a listening example of like a song form, and I
Yeah.
was just like, I couldn't pay attention to that because I was like, this is Steely Dan. I had thought this was like old person music. I had no idea. So
Right.
anyway, he was great, but the classes were taken over by rock kids, and I was a rock kid, like meaning that like I started playing music in rock bands. Like that's what we all did. We had original bands. We like some broke up and would trade members and had them start new ones and rival with each other. And but like we were all into like Zeppelin and ACDC and Sabbath and shit like that, The Who. And so like I took jazz ensemble for the same reason that all of us took jazz ensemble, which is like, whoa, you can play guitar and drums in school. What? And it's for accredited class. Hell yeah, let's do it. So we would do it. But then I got interested in jazz over the years, like, and some of these kids just never did. And by my senior year, when we would be doing listening examples, certain kids would be like noodling on the amps and stuff like that. I would literally walk around unplugging people's guitars like from the amps just because I was like, shut the fuck up. Like I
That's
need
right.
to know what a 251 is. Like I don't care. I don't want to hear you play Black Dog wrong. Like shut up. I don't care.
Yeah, it's like
So
stop with this bong water.
yes, exactly. This is where I learned this. I was like, dude, it doesn't matter that like 4 or 5 of us here are like intently listening because we're like, this shit's going to be on audition exams and stuff like, or like, like trying to get into music school. Like I care, like I want to know what this information is and you're bothering me. So, but I was like, why am I doing this? Like, why aren't you kicking this kid out of the fucking class? Like,
Yeah.
so I, what we did was we lobbied to have advanced jazz ensemble. We were like, dude, you can't make us play with these chuckleheads anymore. Like the 5 of us can actually do this. We can read these charts, just give us our own tunes and give them these other ones. And so that's how we settled it. But I kind of like have always had this thing for the kids who are there who really do want to learn, and then those bong water kids who are just going to fuck the whole thing up. So I brought that into my like world, but more so than that, I really want to deliver that like that individual joy that hearing Kid Charlemagne brought me. And I'm in a much easier position because I have a program that people have to pay money to go to. So no one's being forced. Everything is beyond voluntary. It's asked for. So like my newest thing that I'm doing, starting it next month, or 2 weeks actually, is I'm calling it Listening Club. Name might change, but so far it's called Listening Club. And
Nice.
we're just going to pick an album. Everyone's gonna show up. We're gonna listen to the album over the PA, over the whole sound system in silence, phones down, and then we're gonna talk about the album. It's like a book club, but we're just gonna listen to a whole album. And like, because I think that the thing that really makes great musicians is listening, and in like the lost art of just sitting there and listening to an entire record. So we're starting with Pink Floyd's Animals. I mean, come on, it's like the best one. To do that with like three 10+ minute long songs. It's all Orwellian themed. Oh, it's great. But just
Yeah.
that idea of like, I've always thought that would be a cool idea, like getting a bunch of people together and uh, just for the sole purpose of listening to a record and then just talking about the record. And like, I haven't been able to make that happen in my social life ever. So I turned it into an educational outing. And I don't know, I think that that's just like magic and really cool. And I'm pumped about it.
Awesome. I actually have manifested that in a social setting, I guess you could say. My friend John and I, brilliant musician, um, we did that a number of times, and we had the plan to like gather more of us to do this, you know? So I freaking love this idea, and it's so true. I mean, it's such a rich experience to, especially like collectively, like I'm really interested in how that will go. Well, collectively, I mean like a group of you like focused in on listening, you know. I've done a lot of meditation in groups, and there's just like more there's just like more energy that happens, you know, than just you alone. You could think about um, all that discipline in the room. You can kind of like piggyback on it almost, right? I mean, there's so much that we do that could be seen in that way. Um, so yeah, I'm super curious how that's going to go. And it reminds me of, I kind of had in mind to talk to some of the classes today about like a couple kind of keywords just to sort of set the tone of the class. And the first keyword would be respect. And I did bring that up in the one class. And then the second keyword was going to be listen, right? And, you know, it definitely applies to music, but it applies overall as well. I mean, it applies to respect in a lot of ways too. So yeah, no, I love that. I love that project that you're bringing into being. And I was also thinking about your job today, you know, with a bit of envy, because I know, yeah, it's kind of like this very music dedicated um, situation you got going on there, right? And kind of smaller classes, right? And all the kids are like quite serious musicians, right? Like they can really play. So my situation's a little different, um, but I mean, I also have my private students, and that's what that is all about, right? And there's also the possibility of me doing those kinds of programs at the school, say like in an after school program or whatever. Um, but I also have hope for each of these classes that I'm doing, to sort of try to get those kids who are really willing and interested. Like one of the kids, it was so sweet after one of the classes today, which, you know, in my opinion, went kind of horribly. There was like a few moments of you know, real sparkle, you know, like when that one problem kid kind of went eased back a bit. um anyway, the one kid comes to me after, he's like, that was a brilliant music class, that was just so, like, he was just like, you know, sharing his real enthusiasm, which and there was something genuine in it for sure, right? um and maybe I could draw, because, you know, I would disagree that it was a great music class, but he's obviously seeing something there that he's kind of pumped up about, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and so I'm hoping to, I forget what you called them, the kids who aren't going to be, the top notch level. I'm hoping to get them on board enough in certain ways, that the other kids can shine a little bit. But it's going to be a challenge. But I'm thinking about taking this approach where it's like, if a kid can really sing a certain style, it's like, okay, we're going to do a song where this kid can have the lead in this style, and then everyone else is supporting, and then have different things like that where yeah, because there's something, one of the moments today was like, I was teaching them a song, and I was curious who was like really getting it enough to maybe perform it for the rest of us, so I kind of grabbed three kids who were like willing, and then they kind of stood up with me, and they were kind of like the band, and then everyone else was listening. So there was just something about that setting the stage um where it brought a certain kind of energy, right? Where it's like, okay, we're listening now, and these guys are really in the spotlight, which I think is really kind of cool. Like it's it's nice to be, in a music class, or, I'm the arts teacher as well. So I can kind of do drama and art as well. And so really I can kind of create these situations where um, the kids can really kind of shine in an artistic way. And I think that's kind of a unique thing at most schools, right? In most school classroom environments, because the general vibe of classroom environment is not really having a student really shine. It's more about like, and this is the something I've been really seeing lately is this sort of the attitude of a lot of teachers is, how can I get by today, right? How can I just like have this classroom manageable enough that I don't go crazy? Like I
Hmm.
met this uh he's a friend of my older brother, so I knew him as a young kid, and so I just kind of got reacquainted with him recently, and he was telling me about he's a teacher now, and it was just the most like uninspiring conversation in a way. I was kind of shocked in a way because he was just setting teaching out to be this chore, and the best thing you can hope for is to not not be too not be you know be driven crazy to a certain degree, and it was really shocking. Like I was almost made speechless by listening to this guy tell me about his work, and so I don't know, I'm just not ready for that at all. um and so yeah, and I'm not even concerned that it's going to go there, because I'm just so not willing to be in a place where everything's a chore, and there's none of that kind of sparkle possible, so yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
One of the things that I've always thought of as being especially torturous is being like extremely proficient or good at something that you're not passionate about at all.
Hmm.
And I hear that when I talk to people who work in sort of like hyper specific areas, and you'll say something like, "What do you do?" And they're like, I'm an HVAC." Like they don't really want to talk about it. You know what I mean? Because they know all of this minutia about like duct work and like all this sort of like very nitty gritty details. They're very good at what they do. It's like my own dad is like a plasterer. Like he's down to the details. I think he's been doing it for more than half of his life. I've never heard him talk about it. Like, I've never heard him be like, "Oh, dude, yeah, I blasted the fuck out of this place." Like, he doesn't do that. He doesn't talk like that about it. And I think that when you get into teaching, at least for me, I didn't mean to. I just wanted to have a job doing music. I just wanted to be around music. Like, that was sort of my own baseline. I was like, okay, I've done enough jobs outside of music to know that I got to be around something. It has to be like a step above, like working at a record store. That doesn't count. At least it didn't for me. Like, I needed to be doing something involving playing music. So I just found teaching, but I fell in love with it. And like, to the point where I don't like, I don't know, I've had the opportunity to tour and make pretty okay money doing it, and I still would not want to leave this position. Like, I just don't. It's a program that I've really built, and I have a lot of pride and affection for. But I don't think that everyone gets into teaching that way, or even if they do get into it and go through that, it's like a honeymoon phase, and they end up sort of, like you said, just trying to make the day go by. And I think that it's irresponsible to call yourself a teacher, and to not actually have an opinion on on teaching, like or maybe opinion is not the word, but like maybe opinion is the word. I was gonna say a philosophy, but no, just like an opinion. Like, I don't know, like, I had plenty of teachers throughout my school life who it was very much just like worksheet, quiz, test, worksheet, quiz, test. And like, any sort of questions directed at them, you were just sort of like given a page number. And maybe it's because of how that sort of, like, my public schooling, like, curriculum, I maybe it was just that restrictive that the teachers couldn't really truly offer anything, because in the way of the material, because the teachers that I had good relationships with, it was based on just like, I thought of Mice and Men was an interesting book, and I wanted to talk to the English teacher about like the themes. So we just had conversations about life, and like that led to that sort of thing. Whereas like other teachers and other subjects, they weren't there. Like, they weren't at that level with the subject, and I couldn't really, even if I had like hey, I'm gonna fucking get this question wrong on the quiz, what's the answer? Like, how do I figure this out? It was not like, I don't know, it just wasn't the same thing. And it wasn't about like what subject. Like, I had a chemistry teacher. This dude loved chemistry. He would spend I sucked ass at chemistry, but I tried kind of hard because this guy was cool, and he loved Lord of the Rings, and I loved Lord of the Rings, and we bonded over that. And whenever I didn't know the answer to something on a chemistry question or a quiz or test, I would write True Silver or Mithril, and then he would give me like half credit because it was a cool reference. Nice. But anyway, I think that it's like, it sucks, and I can have compassion for people because maybe they end up in a teaching position where they're really not afforded the ability to have like an earnest like influence over the material in a way that is like that they're passionate about. So they just look at this job as like, yeah, it's a fucking job. It's a yeah, I got the summers off. That's cool. But I'm more, I don't know. I tend not to pity people, but I feel like that sucks, and I feel bad. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know, you have a responsibility in some way, accepting that role as a teacher. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's quite a role. I watched this movie recently, and usually I don't watch like Netflix movies, but my mom invited me to watch this, and it sounded really cool. And it was a great movie, I'd say. It was called Lunar, something about a yak in a classroom, and it was about a teacher going to this very remote village in Bhutan and teaching. And it was a really cool story. But there was a line from this movie about like this little town had such respect for teachers, right? And even the teacher going there, he didn't ever meet that kind of respect, even as he did his teaching studies and so on to become a teacher. Like he was really uninspired about being a teacher, but he shows up and this town has this respect, right? And it was kind of summed up in this line, and I hope I can remember it now. But it was something like, the teacher shows you something like your right way forward. It was something very
Mm.
like it show like they show you the right path, you know, like it was vague enough that it wasn't like they're just scripting the path, but there's something where it's like, you know, intuitively perhaps they are setting this sort of or maybe there's just a trust in their own intuition and sense that if you follow that, you'll be led on the right path. And you know, referencing what you just spoke about, and this sort of like the story of like not knowing the chemistry answer, but putting like, you know, quicksilver or whatever, and then like getting a little bit of points. Like it just shows me that there's some joy in that process, right? In that relationship, perhaps. That I think that's a key, right? And it's hard to encapsulate joy as well, because what is that? But I think about it was a couple High Magic episodes back. So this, you know, show that's that James True and Sarcastic Warlock host. And I think it was James was talking about the difference between being sort of a verb in life, or living life as a verb, as opposed to living life as a noun.
Mm.
And, you know, like that comes to mind thinking about these teachers who are either inspired or uninspired. So the uninspired ones, like they're really being a noun about it. And there's something about them that's not
Mm.
moving, right? Like a friend shared something on social media recently about teachers being sort of threatened by AI, like their job security being threatened because AI is going to take over, something like that. And I was just um, like most teachers are, well, I shouldn't say most teachers, but there are some teachers who are primarily concerned about job security. And that's just a really uninspiring way to go, right? That's like living life as a noun. That's living life as securing your, you know, um, putting your financial security above kind of all else. Like how much more noun can you get? You almost like become, you know, a dollar bill at that point, like just like a cog in the wheel, right? So whereas the verbing, the joy, it has got this other thing going on, right? There's joy, there's love there. There's kind of like a relate, like you're really tuned into the student, and you know, like there's almost like a mutual path of enjoyment that you are interested in sort of cultivating, putting your energy into that. So yeah, it's a really, you know, because I think about different teachers I've had, and the ones who I really kind of remember as having a spark, it was never really about the content, but the content always just sort of shone a little bit more. Like I had a physics teacher who was kind of cool. Like there was something about her where she kind of loved physics, but um, you know, the way she would set up problems, like she would always just set up this scenario. She'd draw a ball moving at a certain speed, and there's some sort of like ramp or something, and you could kind of just jump into this scenario, and the way she sort of solved the problem, there was just like an elegance to it, you know, like there was um it reminds me, I think it was my grade 5 math teacher. She once like complimented my work in this way that was like I still remember. Like she just said, like the way you like demonstrate your solution is just beautiful. Like there was something like that. And I kind of get that, you know, there's, if there's a sort of flow in in the steps, that then there's kind of an elegance to it, right? And I also think of a music teacher I had in high school, and he was always like, he was a great musician, um, but man, he did not like being there in the classroom. Like the main thing I remember about him is knuckleheads. Like he would just shout that once in a while. Like he just had this kind of like bitterness, towards just radiating outwards. And I mean, it's just, there was no inspiration in the music there, right? Like there was some technical uh, uh, information being conveyed, but like there was no nothing more, right? It didn't go any deeper. So yeah, it's and then to kind of come back to this like right path thing, like there's a depth to the right path, right? And there's something I think we remember about good teachers because they invited us on that path, and and now I kind of think like, you don't have to be a professional teacher to do that, right? There's just something about, maybe that's even, it's a more even basic um thing that we can bring to relationship itself. It's like if we see someone's in a funk, we can kind of like, and this word Kachina comes to mind, this like sacred clown, like, and I know um I heard recently, like, this is a good way to encounter difficult situations. It's like, just be the sacred clown, like, and I just feel like you do bring some light to the situation and perhaps invite that right path. So yeah, some cool thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's about meeting them where they're at, whoever the
Mm.
student is. Like they're in front of you for a reason, whichever reason that is. Your responsibility is to meet them there. So it's not about dragging them into some ideal or trying to um, tell them that they're wrong about their reasons for why they do or do not want to do something. I don't know. I've always found that if you can just sort of address sort of where this person is coming from, you're going to be able to communicate with them in a real way, without there being this pretext of you're an authority figure, and I'm someone who doesn't want to be here. So I'm just based on that relationship, I'm not going to listen to anything that you say. Whereas if you can sort of get at where, and this doesn't even have to be like a problem kid like we were talking about earlier, but even someone who is really struggling with something, um, you more have to. It's like if they're really struggling because they're not studying, you kind of have to address that. You have to find a way as the teacher, like if that's becomes obvious to you that it's like this kid's frustrated because they actually can't figure out how to like effectively study this material, that's where you meet them. You don't go at them on the level of like, why don't you get this? Because they probably do get it. It's just a matter of retaining the information. Whereas, um, if someone else is in a completely different place, even if they're struggling on the same piece of material or the same like subject, you might want to approach it a lot differently with them because they have a whole other bag of tricks that they have available to them that maybe this other kid didn't, and vice versa. So I think it really becomes, if you are going to be, right, in the sense of a verb, be a teacher, and you're actually going to teach and have an opinion on what that means and what it entails and what it carries. I think that you have to adopt this situation of like, well, if I were this student, what would I do? Meaning that if I would adopt their conditions and their, one thing that we've talked about before, but like one thing that I do with guitar students who are just starting, when they're struggling with playing a chord, I will go get a lefty guitar and I will try to play the chord lefty because I can't play guitar lefty. So like I can't fret with my right hand. So I'm basically just as mechanically deficient as they are. And so I can actually simulate with pretty decent accuracy the experience of what it feels like to suck at playing a D chord again and be like, oh, okay, that's right. Hey, all right, so I know it really doesn't feel good, but you're going to want to try to keep your thumb in the middle of like the back of the neck. I know you're going to want to turn it sideways to break this thing, but you're going to want to do that. Yeah, I know the muscles hurt. But that's the point. It's supposed to strengthen your hand. But it's like to get there to that specific to where you're like, you know, with my left hand, like it just does stuff. It does stuff that their left hand doesn't do because my left hand's been doing that for a couple decades now. Whereas my right hand is not going to be able to do that. So like that helps me literally try to meet them where they're at. But just that thing in general, I think is, it's super valuable. It was very valuable to me that a lot of my teachers could see where I was coming from, even though I wasn't necessarily expressing that. Like one time, my drum teacher, who I still take lessons with, we had like a 7-year gap in my 20s, but been back for a long time. That's a story for another day. Either way, he told one time I told him one week that I didn't have time to practice, and he was like, all right. He's like, yeah, totally makes sense. You didn't have time. Making time is going to be important. So what you need to do for next lesson is I need you to make a list of like everything you do after school and like timestamp it. And I was like, okay. So I did that and then quickly realized it was like, I got home and then I played Halo and then I watched the Street Fighter movie, like half of it with Jean-Claude Van Damme. And then I talked to my girlfriend on the phone, and then I practiced for 45 minutes, and then I ate dinner, and then I had homework. And then it was like, you do that for 2 days in a row. And I'm like, I don't need to do this anymore. I get the point. Like he forced me to literally be like, to just actually recognize the ludicrousness of that statement without saying, Dylan, that's stupid. Yes, you did have time. He actually took a week to like, and I don't know, that wouldn't have landed on everyone, but it landed on me. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, you can't just like, I can't tell this guy, hey, I want to be a professional drummer, and hey, I didn't have time to practice because I was watching Street Fighter. Like it's just not, it's not, those two things aren't compatible. And he had the decency to actually but not the decency, yeah, the foresight, I think, and the wisdom, but maybe are the same thing. But he was able to see that as long as I actually did that, I was going to recognize right away that like, okay, no, this isn't acceptable. No, I was like 17 at the time, or 16, but
yeah,
it was him being able to recognize where I was at as a teenager in the mentality of like, he knew that I did want this. He knew that this was a goal of mine, but he, I think, also was aware that I was letting menial little distractions get in the way in some, like in like a death by a thousand cuts way. Cause it wasn't like I was just like, you know, I went like after school and did this one thing all day. It was just like a bunch of little things like, oh, and then I did this for an hour, then did this for 2 hours. And next thing I know, it's like 6:30 p.m. and I can't play drums past 9 because there's babies and they're asleep. So it was like, it was, I don't know. It was something that really stuck with me that,
yeah, man.
yeah, just that idea of really finding out not only where someone is at in the subject, but where they're at as a human being and trying to really relate to that. And yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And I just love that he also had the foresight of realizing that like him telling you something only goes so far, right? It's actually up to the student to learn these things or to like really put it together for themselves, right? So he gave you the task that would let you like, you know, really examine this part of your life, right? In terms of like what you're doing with your time, rather than just trying to like spoon feed it to you, right? Which I just think there's a lot of depth in that approach. Like he clearly right, and it's very hands off in a way. Like it's very kind of like a laid back way to approach things, you know, which I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, that kind of gentle way where you kind of trust things are going to work out, you know, because otherwise you're going to be hounding the student in this way or that, and they're not going to have enough space to learn, right? Because yeah, at the end of the day, it's for each of us to like learn whatever's important for us next to learn, right? And and yeah, I think having that kind of gentle space and yeah, I just love that instruction, um, that allowed you to put it all together, you know. And there's a quote that came to mind when you were talking about like meeting the student where he's at. And it's a quote by Han Shan, which is he's like a mountain hermit poet from ancient China, and it translates to cold mountain. And I think he lived on Cold Mountain too, as well. There's a cold mountain in China. So, and the quote is, "If your heart be the same as mine, you'd get it and be right here." And you know, because there's something about the heart that we're talking about here in terms of like meeting the student where they're at, kind of being able to, um, well, I think just like, you know, because I think with the heart, you're sort of interested in people, you care about them, right? There's this sort of, you know, like Jesus's bleeding heart comes to mind, you know, these images where there's this sort of glowing heart with the sort of thorns in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Comes to mind. And yeah, I think that that's kind of necessary to be on this path of a good teacher, right? To yeah, meet the student where they're at. And if you get that, you'll just be right there. And there's sort of, you know, there's that kind of nothing more to the path at that point, because whatever is important will kind of reveal itself at that point, right? Um, yeah.
Yeah, and you as the teacher, you don't know what their path is and what it looks like.
Yeah.
You just know that it's theirs, and that whoever they are, is going to be what determines what that looks like for them. So it's really not. It's futile to try and uh, pigeonhole them into fitting into your archetype, the things that worked for you. It's really more about, like, at least in that my specific situation, he was able to read that I was being honest. I truly didn't think I had time, and that it was actually a priorities issue. So
Yeah.
that's but yeah, you're right. You actually have to be able to, I think, be operating from, you can't just be operating from your head and saying, like, no, logically deducing the problem, and you can't just only go on gut instinct. You actually have to, I think, use your heart and try to um, really compassionate this person and see, um, if you can, what they like what their version of the truth is and how they're acting on it, and just sort of, yeah, at least that's what I've found in my best experiences with my teachers, is that they knew me, or at least my tendencies. They were able to observe them, and they were able to really steer me in almost like judo. Like, they knew my momentum, like where I was going, and which way the wind was blowing, and which way to, just apply the right amount of pressure to get me in the right areas. And it's like, or maybe they were lucky and I was lucky too. Either way, I think that, maybe those are the same things. Like, that what we call luck is actually just fortune, is actually just intention, is actually just being present and able to affect someone in a true humane way that really speaks to them, like on that heart to heart level, from soul to soul or ego to ego, to really say, like, hey, like, isn't that like namaste? It's like, my soul recognizes your soul, or something to that effect, where it's just like, I can relate to you. I can relate to your struggle specifically, in this area, and I can relate to your struggle humanely in this area, and I can relate to your struggle spiritually in this area, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it really just does become this all encompassing, very fulfilling thing that I love dearly and wouldn't give up for anything.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, and I think again of that Rumi poem of "Increase Your Need." You know, it's like I kind of what I'm getting from what you're saying is that the teacher sort of opens themselves to grace just as much as the student is going to receive grace, right? It's not kind of like a over and above situation. It's like as much as you can just be authentic with what's going on, there's a sort of grace that enters the situation, you know, this sort of intelligence that that just kind of works things out. And so, yeah, I come back to that poem about increase your need. It's like, which is almost just inviting us to have faith in that path of, you know, open yourself to the challenges, to the vitriol that's around, even another person's, you know, and maybe you'll unlock some things that will unlock for them as much as for you. So yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we're a little over our hour mark. Do you want to wrap up soon, Mr. Dillon?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's keep to this hour thing for now until we get demands for longer shows.
Okay.
Until they're banging our doors down.
That's right. That's right. Well, it feels like a good moment to wrap up too, is what I'm sensing. So
Yeah, that's a good little ribbon.
yeah, nice. Well, it's been a pleasure, Dylan. Thanks for this.
Likewise, man. I'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, sounds good. Ciao.
Peace.